Hi, health psychology students. This presentation is about mindfulness and its use as a stress management tool. There are a lot of misconceptions about mindfulness and mindfulness meditation, and I'd like to talk about those misconceptions, also definitions that we use in psychology, and talk about how you could use mindfulness as a stress management tool. First, I'd like to dispel some myths about mindfulness. One myth is that mindfulness is meditation. These are actually two different things. Mindfulness is a skill, an awareness skill, an attentional skill. Meditation is a practice that can be used to develop that skill. Another myth is that mindfulness is just for Buddhists. And though it's true that mindfulness, as it's used in psychology, comes from a Buddhist tradition, there are a lot of aspects of Buddhism that are not included there. And I think if you talk to most Buddhists, they would say that the definition that we use in psychology and the type of meditation that's been used in studies of using mindfulness and mindfulness meditation for stress management and pain management don't capture everything that Buddhism offers. Another myth about mindfulness is that mindfulness refers to emptying or clearing your mind or settling your mind. And that's really not true either. Mindfulness is just being aware of what your mind is doing. Now, it might be that your mind is very clear, but it might be that your mind is very busy and cluttered. And mindfulness is just knowing what's going on with your attention and what's going on with your present moment experience. Sometimes people think that mindfulness is some kind of mystical trance state or that you'll get blissed out by it, and that's not true either. It can be a mystical trance-like state, but most of the time it's not. And another myth is that mindfulness in and of itself is relaxing, and that's not necessarily true either. Sometimes it is relaxing, but sometimes it allows you to notice how agitated you are, how restless you are, how lethargic you are. But by noticing those things and understanding those things, then you can have a little more control over your emotional regulation. You can have a little more control over your attention. What we know in psychology about what mindfulness is good for is that it can be very useful for stress management, and it can also be really useful for managing pain and also for the treatment of psychological disorders. So mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy are all examples of therapies that are used to treat psychological disorders like depression and anxiety and other kinds of disorders. And mindfulness has been found to be very useful in the treatment of that. I don't want to focus on that for this presentation, but research has shown that it is a useful tool for treating those disorders. But it's also been examined in looking at physical disorders as well. It's been very useful for helping people manage chronic pain conditions. And it's been found to be quite useful for improving mood and well-being for individuals who have chronic illness, including people who have cancer and those who have fibromyalgia, which is a chronic pain condition. That's just a couple of examples. In non-clinical populations, in other words, those who don't have psychological disorders or don't have chronic physical illnesses, mindfulness has been shown to help reduce negative affect or negative emotion. It helps to reduce anxiety. It allows people to be more adaptive in their responses to stress. It is linked to improved romantic relationships, usually through improved communication in those relationships, and decreased negative self-focused attention, so self-consciousness and also negative self-consciousness and also negative thoughts about the self, and decreased ego defensive responsivity under threat. In other words, when people's worldviews are threatened, they tend to get very defensive about their worldviews and can be quite prejudicial in their responses. And mindfulness has been found in some studies to reduce that kind of response when people do feel threatened. And this all comes from a review article on mindfulness and the effects of mindfulness. This is one definition of mindfulness. I've actually cobbled this together from a number of different definitions, but we can think about mindfulness as being a state of mind characterized by awareness of one's present moment experience with an attitude of curiosity and non-judgment and a willingness to be with what is. And I'd like to break down that definition. First of all, let's talk about present moment experience and what that means. Present moment experience means whatever it is you're paying attention to right now in this present moment. So it's whatever you're paying attention to right now, and I'll give you an example of that. When it gets warm out, I like to run outside. And it's a pretty nice day here today in Michigan in the 50s. So I went for a run. There are a lot of things I could think about or pay attention to when I'm on a run. I could pay attention to the things around me. I could pay attention to the trees, the road, the cars. Hopefully I pay attention to that. Other runners, the sound of a dog, the sound of a bird, what it smells like. I could be paying attention to the feelings in my own body, how hard my heart is working, what my lungs feel like, maybe what the wind feels like in my hair, what the sun feels like on my skin. Maybe I feel a little twinge in my knee. I could be paying attention to those things. I could be paying attention to thoughts that I'm having, and I might be thinking about something that happened 2 weeks ago. I might be thinking about something I'm going to do once I get home or something that I'm going to do next week. I could be completely daydreaming about something that I'd like to have happen. I could be worried about something. So I could be paying attention to a lot of different things. And present moment experience means whatever it is I'm paying attention to in the present moment. And being mindful of that means I know what I'm paying attention to in the present moment. So if you've ever been on a run and you go on a similar route, or if you've driven in a commute and you've gone the same route a bunch of different times, you might notice that sometimes you end up at your destination and you think, where am I? How did I end up here? Because you've been distracted. Obviously, you're paying attention to the road. You're paying attention to where you're going at some level, but you get distracted by your own thoughts and you don't even realize it. Mindfulness is knowing what you're thinking about. So it's not necessarily paying attention to the trees and the birds or your body. It's knowing what you're paying attention to in the present moment. So it's a present moment experience. Another piece of this definition, mindfulness is a state of mind characterized by awareness of your present moment experience. Do you know what you're thinking about at any given moment? Maybe you've also had the experience where you've been reading through a textbook assignment or you've been reading something else and you get to the end of the page and you realize I have no idea what I just read because you were sort of reading it, but really your attention was elsewhere. So it's being aware of your present moment experience. And meditation teachers like to use metaphors a lot, and there's a metaphor of a river and a river bank. You can think about your experiencing mind as the river. Sometimes the river flows quickly, sometimes the river flows slowly, sometimes the river is pretty clear and calm, sometimes it's pretty murky, and there's a lot of stuff that's stirred up. That's what you're experiencing. Mindfulness is your observing mind, as if you are standing on the riverbank, just noticing what's happening with the river. You're not jumping into the river. You're not trying to stop the flow or slow down the flow or clean up all of the gunk and tree limbs and sticks in the river. You're just standing on the riverbank, watching with a sense of curiosity. Another metaphor that's used, another water metaphor, is the waterfall metaphor. So if you were on this path and you could stand behind the waterfall, you could watch the water flow over. And if there were any sticks or anything, leaves in that waterfall, you could just watch them go past. So it's being able to observe your mind, not trying to control it, and observing it with curiosity, but not getting too attached to what's going on in your mind. But you also aren't doing it in a way where you're completely detached from it. So you can gain some perspective on your experience without becoming completely detached from it. So you're not like a robot or a computer. You still care about your experiences, but you're not all caught up in that river, or you're not caught up in that waterfall. Another aspect of this definition is the attitude. The attitude is one of curiosity and non-judgment. In English, we don't have a word that means not judging, so we have to just use non-judgment. Oftentimes, though, we approach our experiences with a lot of judgment. we think of them as good or bad. If you're studying and you're really on a roll and you're focused and you're doing really well, you think, this is really good. How can I keep this going? How can I achieve this again? If you're anxious or you're feeling overwhelmed or you're agitated or you're bored or you're tired, you might have negative feelings about that. You might have a negative judgment about it. This is bad. I have to get rid of this. I feel bored. I have to get rid of this boredom immediately. I feel anxious. I have to get rid of this anxiety immediately. So we often attach judgments to our experiences. We might even get mad at ourselves for having certain types of experiences. And so mindfulness is being aware of one's present moment experience, but being non-judgmental about it and approaching it with curiosity. A metaphor that I like to use to try to achieve that curiosity and non-judgment is to think about a sporting event and you have different types of commentary. Play-by-play is just reporting exactly what's happening in the game. Color commentary is then making comments that are more judgmental. So it might be that, I feel anxious. I have to go give this presentation in a class. And the play-by-play would be, I'm feeling anxious. My heart is racing. My hands feel sweaty. Color commentary would be something like, oh boy, she's going to be in big trouble if she can't do well on this presentation. She's got to get rid of this anxiety or else the rest of the school year is not going to be any good. So focusing more on the play-by-play, the description, rather than the color commentary. Another way that I like to think about it is if you think about your GPS that you use when you're trying to get somewhere. I have a really terrible sense of direction. So the GPS sometimes doesn't actually help me. But I have the voice on, and the GPS lady never gets mad at me. She doesn't say, in 500 feet, turn right. And then if I miss the turn, she doesn't say, are you serious? Did you seriously you missed the turn? I've been telling you for the past 5 miles that you're going to have to turn there. And then I told you when it was a mile away. And then I told you when it was a quarter mile away. And then I told you when it was 500 feet away. And then I went ding ding when it was time to turn and you didn't turn. Okay, fine. I will just have to recalculate the route. Never mind. I don't know why you even bring me with you. No. She just says, make a legal U-turn. And she'll just keep saying that. Now, the GPS is a computer, so it's not a human, but I like thinking about having that kind of approach to experiences. Like, I'm still angry about that thing that someone said to me. It's pretty interesting. I feel anxious about this. I'm feeling sluggish, rather than attaching judgment to it. And then the final part of this definition is a willingness to be with what is. And that's sometimes called acceptance or allowance. You allow yourself to feel whatever it is you're feeling or to experience whatever it is you're experiencing. And this is especially useful for managing stress because oftentimes people engage in avoidant coping. And we talked about things like mental disengagement or using substances as a form of avoidance. Or behavioral disengagement, just giving up. And that's also known more generally in psychology as experiential avoidance. We want to try to avoid or escape unpleasant thoughts or emotions. I can't stand being bored. I can't stand being angry. I don't want to feel overwhelmed. So we might procrastinate or we might be in a state of denial. So I want to talk about another type of metaphor here. A few years ago, I had these big ground wasps in my yard, and my children were very frightened of them. And they're not actually wasps; they're called cicada killers. But I didn't know much about them. They're just very big and intimidating looking. So I decided to look on the internet to find out what I could do to get rid of them. And I found this website that said, here are 2 ways you can get rid of these cicada killers. One, they make holes in the ground, and this is actually my yard this past summer, but they make these holes in the dirt and they kick up dirt. And so what you can do is take plastic forks and go around and mark where their holes are. Don't put it in the holes, but mark where their holes are. Then at night, when it gets dark, take your flashlight out, find the holes. Don't shine the light into the hole because that might wake them up and then make them agitated. But you take about a cup of ammonia and pour it into each hole. And then that might kill them, or it might not get to all of them. So you'll have to check the next day. And I thought that sounded not so great because I don't want to buy ammonia. I don't want to pour it in my yard. I don't want to buy plastic forks. It didn't sound good. But the other suggestion was to just leave them alone. Leave them alone. They're generally pretty docile. They don't attack unless they are attacked. The females are the only ones with stingers. They also, because they're cicada killers, they help to keep the cicada population in check, which is always a good thing. And they have interesting behaviors. They dig and they move around. It's really interesting to watch them. And they'll be dead by August. So they're around just for a couple months. They'll go away eventually. And I thought this was a really great metaphor for our negative emotions and negative thoughts. That if you just let them be there, acknowledge that they're there, label them, recognize it, eventually it will go away. Just like when we talked about urge surfing, the urges that are there, if you just wait for a while, it will eventually go away. Or you can. Here's a video of a cicada killer that has just killed a cicada. So you'll see the cicada killer and the cicada underneath it, and it's pretty cool.
Okay.
I also have a 5-minute video of them digging holes, but I won't show you that right now. So it's true. It's pretty interesting to observe. And they keep the cicada population in check. And then by August, they were gone. So that's the definition of mindfulness, a state of mind characterized by awareness of one's present moment experience with an attitude of curiosity and non-judgment and a willingness to be with what is. How can you develop mindfulness as a skill? You can practice it at any time, bringing awareness to your present moment experiences. What am I paying attention to now? What are my emotions now? What are the physical sensations I'm experiencing right now? What are the thoughts I'm having right now? A good way to practice it is through meditation. Mindfulness meditation is a practice in which you set aside time and space to practice being aware of your present moment experience. And we often do that through a meditation on some experience that you're having, like the breath. So that's the most common one. And I'll talk a little bit about meditation on the breath. It's a method of practicing mindful awareness. So we'll do this brief mindfulness exercise. There are lots of guided meditations that you can find online as well. What I'm going to ask you to do is pay attention to your breath wherever you feel it most vividly and most prominently. And then just to be curious about your breath, noticing what it feels like. You'll notice what happens, and your attention will probably be drawn away from your breath. So you'll have other thoughts and feelings that will arise, and that will happen. That happens all the time. Just notice them with a sense of curiosity rather than judgment. So I invite you to get comfortable, be seated in an upright position that allows you to be awake and alert. And you can close your eyes if you feel comfortable closing your eyes. Otherwise, you can just soften your gaze and look at something that's not going to be distracting. I'll ring a bell 3 times to begin and end the meditation. And we'll just do this for a couple minutes. Take a few deep breaths just to orient yourself to this mindfulness practice. You can let out some audible sighs if you like. And then let your breathing settle into a natural rhythm. Now pay attention to your breath. Wherever you feel it most prominently, that might be in your nostrils, it might be in your throat, could be in your chest or your belly. And if you can't decide where you feel it most vividly or most prominently, just choose one of those places. Now bring some curiosity to your breath. What does it feel like? Notice the sensations of each inhalation. Is it warm or cool? Does it feel sharp or soft? Notice what each exhalation feels like. And notice that space in between the inhalation and the exhalation. You probably haven't paid close attention to your breath all day today. Just take a moment to do that now. And continue to keep your awareness on your breathing. Really generate some curiosity about the breath. When you notice that there's some thought or feeling or other sensation that has captured your attention, just notice them with a sense of curiosity rather than judgment. You could label it as thinking, or maybe you hear a sound that has taken your attention away from your breath. Notice that that's happened. And then gently gather your attention and place your attention on your breath. And every time you notice that your attention has been captured by something else, you're being mindful. You're noticing where your attention is. You're bringing awareness to your present moment experience. And every time you notice that your attention has wandered somewhere else, it's perfectly fine. You can gently gather your attention, bring it back to your breathing again, and you can begin this over and over again. Your attention might wander 10 times. Your attention might wander 100 times. Every time you notice it, you're being mindful. When you're ready, you can open your eyes, take a few more deep breaths, and bring your attention to your surroundings. So that's a very common type of meditation practice. There's also a walking meditation. You can meditate while standing, while sitting. There are body scan meditations. There are meditation poems that you can use. We often do meditation on the breath because you can use the breath as kind of an anchor, kind of a reference point. If you think about your mind as being like a forest, and you might wander all around that forest, your thoughts go all over the place, your breath can be like a path. So you can come back to that path over and over again. It's a reference point. There's nothing magical about the breath. It's something that everybody does, and it's something you can pay attention to. So that's why we often use that as an object of meditation. Another metaphor, your mind is like a puppy. If you take a puppy on a walk, it's going to explore lots of different areas, and you don't want to try to keep your attention on a tight leash. You don't want to try to strap your attention to the breath or tie it up tightly. You can let it wander around, and then you can gently bring it back to the sidewalk or the path. And then it'll wander off again. It'll sniff here and there. It'll explore different things, and you can bring it back to the path. And the path is really there so that you can see when your puppy is not on the path. So it's not that there's something really wonderful about the path or that is important about the path, but it is a way for you, it's a reference point. How far has my puppy wandered? Some of the benefits of mindfulness, in addition to the ones that I talked about earlier with respect to psychological and physical outcomes, is that it allows you to be intentional about your attention. You can't direct your attention to something unless you know where your attention is at the present moment. So it's difficult to pay attention to a lecture or what you're reading or a conversation that you're in if you don't know if you're really paying attention to it or not. Once you realize, oh, this person's telling me something, but I'm really thinking about something else, then you can be intentional about where you place your attention, which is, of course, very important for everybody, but especially important for students. Mindfulness also helps people to regulate emotions. It can allow you to identify your stressors. If you notice, boy, when I interact with this cousin of mine, my heart rate, I notice, really races, or I feel agitated. Those can be really important cues about things that stress you out. And if you're not paying attention to your present moment experiences, you might miss some of those stressors. Mindfulness also helps us to recognize how emotions color our perceptions of the world. Have you ever been in a really bad mood and everything seems bad? That is, of course, something that you can identify more easily if you're being mindful. So if your roommate does something that is completely irritating to you, maybe it is something that is truly inconsiderate, or maybe you had something bad happen to you earlier that is now coloring your perception of that situation. So if we can be aware of how our emotions affect how we see things, then we can better manage our emotions, better regulate our emotions. And we can avoid getting entangled in negative emotions. Say you're going for a job interview and you have the thought that you can't be anxious during this job interview, because if you get anxious, then you'll stumble over your words and you'll forget what you wanted to talk about and you'll look like a fool and they'll never hire you. Well, if you have those kinds of thoughts, when you go into your interview, if it's an important interview, you're likely to be anxious. You're likely to be a bit nervous. And if you continue to have those judgments, that was something that I screwed up. I misspoke and now they're never going to hire me. I stumbled over that word. I forgot that thing that I was going to say. I can't remember the name of that thing. You can get all tangled up in those negative emotions. If you go into your interview and you notice, I'm feeling anxious, and you allow it to be there, just like the cicada killers, it can be there and you can do your interview and it might go away. It might not go away, or it might come back later in the middle of the night and say, that was a really dumb answer that you gave to that question. But you'll avoid getting entangled in it. This is comic that I like. You can't get rid of your fears, but you can learn to live with them. And this woman is offering her fear some more tea. You don't necessarily have to give your fear or your anger tea, but certainly if it's sitting there, it's not going to interfere with your interview as much as if you are wrestling with it and hitting it and trying to get rid of it or pleading with it to go away. Just allowing it to be there can help you to further regulate your emotions. Mindfulness can also help us manage our behavior. And we talk about reactions versus responses. A reaction would be your immediate reaction to something. For example, one time my husband said to me, I think we should really start to do a better job of cleaning off the countertop. And my immediate reaction that I was thinking about was, are you serious? Because you leave your stuff on the countertop all the time. Your keys, your spare change, your gum wrappers, miscellaneous tools. And I'm the one who cleans them off. Are you really serious? My response would be my chosen behavior. And my chosen behavior, I might not want to say those things in that way. It might be more productive for me to say them in a different way. That's not to say that you shouldn't be assertive, you shouldn't stand up for your rights or anything like that, but you can put some space between your immediate reactions and your responses. Another problem that I often have is saying yes to too many things. Can you be on this committee? Can you do this thing? Can you write this letter? And I say, yes, 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 no problem. When really sometimes I should say no. And it's helpful if even though my immediate reaction is, yes, I want to please you, I want to do what you're asking me to do, it'd be useful for me to have some space so that I can say, do I have time to do this now? Let me give some thought. Or maybe even, no, I have too many other things to do. Or no, I don't want to do that. So having some space between reactions and responses is really useful. Mindfulness can also help us become more aware of those automatic patterns of behavior, those habitual responses that we have to stress, for example, or those habit loops that we talked about earlier, where there's a cue or a trigger that triggers a behavior, and then that behavior leads to some type of reward. We're better able to notice those habit loops when we can be mindful and when we have mindfulness as a skill. And so we can put some space between that cue, oh, it's time to go get a snack at the vending machine, or I'm going to grab my phone, and that immediate reaction that we would have versus responses that we want to make. Oh, I want to do my homework right now and not look at my phone. Or I want to go for a walk rather than go to the vending machine this time. And it might seem like if you're putting space between your initial immediate reactions and your responses, that then your behavior would be really slow, like sloth-like slow. So your roommate says something to you and your immediate reaction is you feel sort of offended and defensive, but you want to respond in a way that's fair, yet still gets your point across. There's going to be this huge gap. But if you practice mindfulness by using something like mindfulness meditation, you can get much faster at it, much faster at identifying what the immediate reaction is, and then making the decision on how you want to act. And finally, mindfulness can increase your resilience in the face of difficult situations. If you think about your resilience as being like a vessel, like a cup, maybe you start out with a cup the size of an espresso cup. And if the coffee is like the stressful events that happen, and you might not have a lot of room, but when you practice mindfulness, you can better manage your emotions. You can better let go of things. You don't get caught up in a negative cycle of emotions. You're not trying to wrestle away or run away from unpleasant experiences that might get in the way of solving problems or might get in the way of opportunities for growth. The more you practice mindfulness, the bigger that vessel gets. So it goes from being an espresso size cup to a latte or a cappuccino. That's more like a cappuccino, probably. Cappuccino size cup. A latte size cup to a bucket. So mindfulness is something that has been studied pretty extensively in psychology now. It's been studied since the 1980s. It's being used for a lot of different things, and it is a useful stress management technique. Decide what you want to do about them.